right. Hi, everybody. Dr. Bridget Young here to, of course, discuss more about the infant formula shortage that we are all barely stuttering through. So, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Bridget Young. I'm the founder of formulaexpert.com. I have a PhD in perinatal nutrition. I'm an infant feeding specialist. And like you, I have been very shocked and just constantly working, doing whatever I can to help people through the infant formula shortage that we're dealing with right now. If you are just looking to switch your baby's formula, just stop watching this. Go to the link in my bio. I have another video all about how to go about finding a replacement infant formula. And the vast majority of families, depending on your location in the United States, you can still do this. This video is going to be discussing the new American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines that really came out yesterday, discussing what families should do in an emergency situation. I mean hardcore emergency. You cannot find any infant formula anywhere. What do you do? So before I get into that, I want to say I'll be going over their guidelines, giving some tips about how to implement these guidelines as safely as possible. But obviously, the number one thing you need to do is call your pediatrician. They may have connection to resources, they may have formula on hand, but they will definitely have an opinion about using things like cow's milk or toddler formula, which we'll be discussing. They know your baby's medical history, and again, they're going to have an opinion and they're educated about this. So that goes without saying. Absolutely everything I'm talking about should not be implemented without consulting with your pediatrician. Okay, disclaimer out of the way. So here is what was released. I will put the link in the comments for this video. Have it open over here. It's healthychildrens.org is where you can find the article. That's a website run by the American Academy of Pediatrics, who makes all the guidelines that pediatricians and people like me follow when helping families feed their babies. So basically, they still agree any infant formula of any kind, like I don't care what brand you're using, what type you're using, any FDA approved infant formula is better than cow's milk or toddler formula. So yes, it means a change, and yes, it probably could even mean some sleepless nights and maybe some cramps and gas, but that's better than an unsafe practice. So first things first, any infant formula is better than cow's milk or a toddler formula. So, and again, I have a whole nother video helping you find one that's going to help your baby be as comfortable as possible. So what is like kind of alarming in this article is that they're helping parents prepare for absolute worst case scenario. I'm hoping we won't get there, but I want you to be prepared because I'm also a parent and it's terrifying to think about it, but you want to know you have a plan. So here's your plan. This is really only relevant for, my notes down here, older infants, so 6 months and up. Again, call your pediatrician. First, they are saying you can, in an emergency, feed for a short amount of time either cow's milk or toddler formula. And I'll go through each of those separately. So let's just talk about toddler formula first. So the AAP statement says that it's actually not appropriate for infants, but if you cannot find any infant formula anywhere, you can feed toddler formula in a pinch for a short temporary amount of time until you can get infant formula back on. That's what their statement says. Everything else I'm going to say now is just my personal opinion about how you would go about doing that as safely as possible. Number one, toddler formula is a totally different beast. I've got lots of videos about it if you want to nerd out, but basically it doesn't fall under the same FDA regulations, and there's a really wide variety in the nutrition, both quality and composition of toddler formula. Some companies make toddler formula and they don't want to go through FDA approval, so they're calling it toddler formula, but it's kind of like an infant formula. Other companies are making formula for toddlers, particularly, for example, a really picky eater or a toddler who's exhibiting failure to meet their growth curve. That's a very different baby than a 6-month-old infant. So yeah, it makes me very nervous. So if you're going to be picking a toddler formula because you are in an emergency situation, talk to your pediatrician. But here are some brands that I'm not affiliated with, but that have formulations that appear a little bit more like that infant formulation. So if I look at the ingredients and I look at the nutrition, I'm like, this does look to me more like it's formulated for a younger baby. Babies only, they have several different types. There's babies only whey, babies only sensitive, etc. Those are kind of looking more like infant formulas, and they're actually manufactured in an infant formula plant. So does not go through all the safety checks that infant formula does, but it would go through some. Great. Cabrita, which is a goat milk formula, they are currently in the process of doing clinical trials to get FDA approval. They do not have it yet as infant formula, but their formulation, again, is a little more similar to an infant formulation than some other toddler formulas. And Serenity Kids, it's a very similar thing. So those are all intact protein, so large proteins, but those are potential options. And I happen to know, like, as of today, on May 18th, I have seen those available, for example, on Amazon or other respectable online retailers. There is also a toddler formula version of Gentlease and a toddler formula version of Nutramigen. Now, as of today, on May 18th, you can absolutely find an infant formula from a different brand that's very similar. So Gentlease is partially hydrolyzed. You can find a partially hydrolyzed infant formula, and 100% everyone would rather have you do that than use the Gentlease toddler. Same with Nutramigen. If you can't find Nutramigen, which is a hypoallergenic formula, as of right now today, you can find a hypoallergenic formula, either store brand Gerber HA or Alimentum, as opposed to using the toddler. This is an emergency situation. For example, if that stops being the case, and so you're stuck being like, God, do I feed an intact toddler or, for example, a partially hydrolyzed toddler? That's a question for your pediatrician. They will have an opinion and they would love to talk to you. Other tips for trying to make it as safe as possible. If you have the luxury of mixing, I would do so. So toddler formulas usually have higher protein and higher concentrations of certain minerals and electrolytes that can be really challenging for a really young baby to handle. So if you have some of your infant formula on hand and you're able to mix like half and half in a bottle, obviously that's going to like dilute out some of those higher concentrations a little bit. If you're using a toddler formula, I know it's an emergency, that may not be the case, but it's worth mentioning. Here's something else, again, that is a personal recommendation. Because toddler formulas are not subject to infant formula regulations, they do not go through all the safety testing that infant formula does. Like, we're in this position partially because of a recall, right? Because there was a contamination issue. Toddler formulas aren't checked because older toddlers' immune systems are better able to handle bacteria. That being said, if you're going to be feeding a toddler formula to a younger infant, between 6 or 12 months, I would recommend preparing the toddler formula according to the WHO guidelines for preparing infant formula. I will put those in the link as well. Basically, it's to boil the water, cool the water to right about, very little wiggle room, 160 degrees Fahrenheit, then add the powder. So that really hot temperature is just enough to kill things like Chronobacter sakazaki, which is one of the bacteria that resulted in that infant death, but it's not enough to degrade some of the vitamins that are subject to heat stress. So it's that special sweet spot. So that's going to give me a little bit of comfort that we're doing the best we can to make this as safe as possible, given that we know it doesn't go through the safety standards that infant formula goes through. Okay, those were the notes I wanted to cover on toddler formula and the use of toddler formulas for an infant in emergency circumstances. Next, very similar thoughts on cow's milk. So this article was written by Dr. Steve Abrams, who's like a baller in infant nutrition. He is like the OG infant nutrition expert. So this article says you can, again, in an emergency situation, total pinch, feed whole cow's milk to an older infant, so an infant at least 6 months, ideally closer to a year, because you have nothing else to feed them and you cannot get your hands on any infant formula. Here's the concerns with cow's milk. Cow's milk causes intestinal bleeding in infants under a year. Not all of them, some of them. This is well documented in the medical literature. It causes actually leakage of blood out of the intestines into the intestinal lumen, like into where the food is, and you can detect this blood in the stool. It's not great. We do not want, we would like to avoid this situation if possible. It's not all infants, and it definitely, the intestinal bleeding, the risk of it decreases as infant ages, and then by 12 months, they're all ready to handle it, which is why we usually say wait until 12 months. So we would like to avoid that as much as possible. Personal opinion here, ways that you can try to avoid this if you are forced to feed cow's milk would again be to mix if you have the luxury. So mix a little bit of your formula, whatever you have left, prepared formula with the cow's milk so it's not just a straight bottle of cow's milk. If you are in an emergency, feed the baby. That's like always number one rule, right? Other things that you can do or notes to have. Another really big concern about cow's milk is that it has basically no iron in it. And older babies need we all need iron, right? We have like high iron needs as human beings. We're not cows. So if you are in a situation where you're forced to feed your baby whole cow's milk, you really need to be focusing on ensuring that they have a lot of iron in their solid foods. I have lots of videos on this of ways you can get iron in, but honestly, again, this is a kind of crazy time in our country right now. I wouldn't bother messing around with anything else. I'd be like straight to meat. If you are forced to have cow's milk as, a replacement for their formula, give them meat. Companies have meat purees that you can get that's going to have the highest iron, and it's going to be much more bioavailable than vegetarian sources of iron, which any other day are totally fine, but I really don't want us to have an epidemic of anemia after this. So again, you can do if you're doing baby-led weaning, your baby's physiologically capable of doing some chewing and munching, you can feed them very, very soft, appropriate meat. But there are great baby food meat purees. I know Gerber and Earth's Best, I think, have like full jars. I'll like throw some sweet potato in there so your baby will eat it, and like really focus on making sure they get iron. I know a lot of pediatricians who are very on top of this are proactively prescribing iron supplementation for families just in case they may have to use cow's milk so that they have it on hand. That's between you and your pediatrician, because your pediatrician knows all your baby's other individual risks for anemia. Some babies have high risk factors, some babies have like tons of stores and they're fine. That's why you call your doctor. So those are the concerns with milk. And again, this is supposed to be very temporary until you can get infant formula. And in this article, they say, like, we don't have a set amount of ounces that you can do a day because we've never been in this situation before, basically. But ideally, it would be no more than 24 ounces of cow's milk a day, because that's the maximum we say for older children, like for 13-month-old children. So obviously, the less the better. Any infant formula is better than cow's milk. Okay, they also make a note about plant-based milk. So if your family is vegan and your baby is on a vegan formula, basically a soy-based formula, they said same thing, plant-based milk can be used in an extreme emergency. However, you want to be sure you get one that has higher protein and ideally fat. So like your standard almond milk that I drink is very low calorie. This is not, we want babies having low calorie. You want to get one that has protein and ideally fat supplementation. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, from what I have seen, at least online, you can still get some soy formula. It may not be your favorite brand, but any infant formula is going to be better than these emergency feeding scenarios. So just switch the formula to soy. And there's also toddler soy formulas that are at least definitely going to have, they might have a lot of protein, but they're going to have more protein than just your standard almond milk that's for adults. So again, your pediatrician will help you navigate it, but those are the things that they're going to be considering and things that you would want to discuss with them. Next, another little plug. I am in New York, so I'm very aware of like our New York WIC and all of that, but we have a New York milk bank here who just released a recent statement saying they have some pasteurized donor milk available. It's only available to infants with a pediatric, or doesn't have to be pediatric, a doctor's prescription. But listen, your doctor will help you with this, especially if your baby is medically fragile and changing formulas is a very severe circumstance, which there are certainly those babies out there. So just Google it, New York Milk Bank, or Google wherever you are, Milk Bank, and they will probably have a statement because they know what's happening right now, whether or not they have milk available. And this is a pasteurized donor milk, so it is completely safe. It's our, the safest way to feed your baby another person's breast milk. On that note, I wanted to bring up a point about breast milk sharing in general. Again, I have a whole other video about this, but I'm just going to give you one little snippet because I've seen it everywhere, and it's really beautiful that a lot of mothers who have different milk are willing to share. The Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine has a whole protocol statement about weighing the risk versus benefits of feeding your baby another mother's milk, but the punchline is that's a conversation between you and the donor and you and your pediatrician. But this protocol gives you basically a recipe for how to pasteurize milk at home. So say you get milk from your neighbor. The reason we say, don't just do this in general is breast milk can contain hepatitis and HIV, like really dangerous things. So you want to be sure you know your donor and you trust their answers about whether they use drugs, caffeine, alcohol, anything that might be important. But you can also sterilize. So like the sterilizing isn't going to do anything if there's THC in the milk, but it will kill some bacteria that can be from contamination, for example, from pumping, and it will kill also many other more fragile viruses and bacteria. So it's the protocol. Again, I'll put the link for where you can look up the protocol. I also have a video about it, but you're basically taking the milk in a glass bottle or glass container, you put it in another pot, fill water up to about where the milk is, and then you boil the water for a certain amount of time, and that's going to give you, it is not the same as getting donor milk. It's not that safe, but it's going to buy you a tiny bit more peace of mind. So those are things that you can do in your own home if you're navigating these really scary feeding modes that you were never prepared to do in the first place. Okay, very last, you will notice that I didn't talk, we're still the party line, do not make homemade formula. So the AAP hasn't said this, but they kind of have come out to read between the lines. In their statement, they say homemade formula, hard no. They would basically rather, if you have an older baby, feed cow's milk than make a homemade formula. This is because once you add all this stuff to cow's milk, the risks just explode. I mean, everybody's seen the old recipe with corn syrup. But listen, corn syrup is just sugar. Do you know how quickly bacteria can go in that? It's delicious. It's just a slosh of bacterial food. God, it's really scary to think about. Also, a lot of the supplements that you'll see in homemade recipes, supplements are not regulated by the U.S., by the FDA or the U.S. They're not regulated at all. So you think you're providing this much B vitamins, you may be providing toxic concentrations. You have no way of knowing. There may be fillers that don't need to be listed on the label that are dangerous to infants. Like, it's scary, scary stuff. So homemade formula, still hard no. Diluting formula, even a little bit, still hard no. So I know that I trust me, I've heard, I understand, like, you got a chunker of a baby at the 90th percentile, like, they're gonna be fine. You're like, well, maybe they can just have a few lower calories. I'll just make it a little lower calorie formula. But that's not the only thing that changes when you dilute formula. Yes, you make it lower calorie, but it changes we say like the osmolality, which is this concentration of electrolytes that change how quickly things cross the intestinal wall and can change how things cross from the intestines out. So you can result in these crazy interactions in the baby's intestines that can result in babies getting really dehydrated, getting kind of water poisoned, like scary stuff. So again, it's not just that they're getting less calories, it's all these other things that may happen because your baby is a baby. I can go on a low calorie diet for a couple days. Babies aren't just tiny adults, their whole little organs are figuring out how to work, and so you have some of these really dangerous risks from things that might seem not so risky, like homemade formula or diluting formula. So still hard no there. So basically the AAP has given you some emergency strategies so that you don't have to dilute your formula or make homemade formula. Again, today is May 18th. This could all change tomorrow. If it does, I will make another video. And the White House And a lot of governmental organizations are working really hard. I've gotten to be part of some conversations surrounding the import of international formula, and I'm desperately hoping that we'll be able to see those on our market. I don't have a timeline. I don't know. I'm not really privy to helping make those decisions. But God, any day would be great, right? Any day would be great. So I hope this helps you. Take a deep breath. Right now, the vast majority of families, you can absolutely still find infant formula. Again, you may be facing a change you don't want, and you may have to deal with some sleepless nights and gas, but at least your baby will be safe. Number one priority, keep the baby safe. Number two priority, keep the baby fed. I don't know, we're moms, right? We have like 5 million priorities. Those seem like top ones. If there is something else I can do to help, leave a comment. I will try to get to it. I am doing a workshop with Tamari from One with the Pump next Monday, where we're going to be going over a lot of these really similar topics. So my goal is to make you feel less panicked that you have a plan. So you know exactly what you're going to do in worst case scenario, and then ideally that will never happen. And feel free to call your pediatrician proactively. Trust me, they're having these conversations all day, every day from concerned parents. So they might be able to help you know, if this I do this, if this I do this, if this I do this, so that you can really just do the best in this terrible otherwise situation. You're doing such a great job. This is totally an unfair hand, but we're all going to get through this together. Hang in there, and yes, we'll get through it together. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.